So we decided we have to walk up the room a little bit, so we're going to get rid of our jackets, right? He has already done it. It's also a way to help with the topic we want to talk about. Like in Japan, they keep the air conditioning at a higher temperature so that the energy waste is lower. Now, energy was a big point, and I think Steffi said it, of the conversation around climate change, and I, for once, used to work for Shell, so I must know that. And Shell is an oil company, an energy company. But yesterday we heard from Amazon, and it seems like they're turning into an energy company. But one of the quotes I've heard from Amazon that I really liked yesterday was, and I quote, "All our choices have a carbon footprint responsibility." So a company that is almost transforming into an energy company is now asking all of us to make responsible choices, right? Every day, using all of our devices. So, Peter, I pass it to you. What that does it mean?
Yes, thank you. And indeed, to spice things up, and I see a few people actually using your phone, a very simple question to you. Do you know how much CO2 you produce with your phone? Do you? So when you made the choice and when you bought whatever manufacturer you bought, did you really make the trade-off and really think about, I go this one or this one because it has a different footprint? Do you actually know how much actually this is in the production phase as opposed to in the use phase? And I can tell you today we have no idea. We don't care. And yes, I do concur. We really have to get this at the forefront of our thinking, on our behavior, to make that change. Now, I can give you a little bit of a background. This phone, in case it's an iPhone, it's about 50 kilograms for the entire life cycle. So now you may think 50 kilograms, is that a lot? So no. It's 60% of that is in manufacturing, 30% is in the use phase, 8% in logistics, and 1 to 2% in recycling, okay? So 50 kilograms you hold in your hand. By the way, your phone usually weighs a quarter of a pound, so that's 200 times what you hold in your hand you are producing. Now, still you may say 50 kilograms, why bother? It's not a lot. There's 1.5 billion phones sold every year. So do the math, and you know you got choice. And actually, this is really what this is all about, knowing our carbon footprint and deliberately changing it.
Thank you. I didn't know you would come out with this to open when I picked the quote, but I think responsibility is a big element of this. And I think we heard the word responsibility also when the CEO of Merck was talking, because at the C-suite level, but everywhere, being responsible for your choices matter and has an impact. So I would like to ask you now, financial sector, and in particular your bank, what is your responsibility? How do you read that? Do you say only to your customers, only to your employee? Do you say to all the stakeholders? What's your vision here?
No, thank you for that, and thanks for having me. And Steffi, thank you very much for organizing this after 2 years of all these virtual things, which work out quite well, but this personal interaction is much better. So thank you for doing this. I recall, and let me put that a bit in perspective, 3 years ago, I think that was my last DLD, I joined in Israel. I was on stage with Ronnie Cohen on a subject which was called impact financing. And at that point in time, we were almost alone on stage because that was a quite exotic topic. Fast forward 3 years later, the whole thing about impact, responsibility, the bigger theme about ESG is everything we are debating and discussing, and we are in the middle of this transformational process. And coming to your question, for us it has at least 2 components. The component as a bank, what do we do as a company to reduce our carbon footprint, to fulfill our role in the society, and what can we do to make this environment a better place to be? On the other side, if you abstract from that what a bank is, then a bank is transforming risk from people who have the money to the people who want to invest the money. And there comes a bank in helping in transforming this society and the companies and the corporates to make their carbon footprint leaner. So that all is agreed, but that sounds easier than it is then in practice. So what does that mean to get better? What does that mean to reduce the footprint? What does that mean to reduce and or to change production facilities, value change, sourcing, et cetera, That's what you said, Peter. What does it take to build a phone or whatever we do in a way which reduces the carbon footprint? And we are in the middle of all of that in health.
And how much does it cost, and how you finance it in a way that it's not counterproductive to what you're trying to do, I guess.
Absolutely. I had this discussion yesterday in a smaller round. Does the fact that we are looking for a more sustainable environment and that we helping and invest in a greener economy is not coming with less risk? Because some of these new production facilities, some of these new procedures, materials, whatever it is, are sometimes unproven technology. And we are in the middle of that, trying to make that happen and to convince the involved parties in what it would take to do that. And like you were saying, I think that is the role of banks, and that's what we try to play.
Now I'm going to throw you a curveball. Inflation. Now, we were in a session on Turkey startup, and they were very ballsy about it because they are used to 75–90% inflation, but we get scared when we have 5%, right? And then the war in Ukraine, and then what is going on in the tech bubble world in the US to begin with. We have seen what happened to stocks of like the giants. Are still your clients listening about climate change and decarbonization and transformation, or there is, we're going back to coal?
Well, we should not forget, quite a lot of companies are still working on their digital strategy, and it is not done yet. Quite a lot of the same companies are still struggling in what does that mean after COVID to adapt their model to this new environment. On top of that, we have the political situation in Ukraine, and we have in the room this big elephant, which is called ESG and sustainable investment. But they are realizing aid is not going away, and it is becoming even more important now. But for quite a lot of all these mid-cap companies, but also for the larger ones, that is quite exhausting in doing that all in parallel, because digitalization is moving forward. And the ESG part is super important. And what makes it even more difficult on the ESG part is there are not that many reference cases out there. So on the digitalization side, it was a bit easier, quote unquote. You had the big tech companies, you had the SAPs of this world, you had the Siemens of this world, where one could say, that is meant by digitalization. Yeah. Let's adapt a bit in this direction, and what does that mean for my own company in the model? On the ESG side, there are not that many reference cases out there.
That's why you have an index, right, if I'm not mistaken?
And that makes it so difficult. And to help them, we have established, or we have founded a bit of an index in making them aware of what is the point of departure. Why is that important? Only when you know where you're coming from, you can show that you're getting better. But there are not that many reference cases, and that makes it much more complex than all the other challenges they are anyway facing.
So I'm going to look at tech for a little bit of optimism. I personally believe that the biggest opportunity comes where you look at circular economy and Internet of Things. And if I look at the other monster that is happening these days, which is the supply chain disruption, what can you tell us about that?
Yes, and actually, let's continue that conversation, because inflation, you're right. Right now in the media, we talk all about this and everything that happens around us. If you think about it though, what we do is we have to find a way that it's a win-win. It's a win for the environment, but it's also a win for the balance sheet and for the P&L. And what happens is, I was just on a board meeting yesterday, and they said our energy prices this year in our budget's going to double. So there you go. So now you have a conversation around actually how can we make this economically viable? And all of a sudden, you're talking now about, should we now actually pull forward the PV on the roof, or whether we should now make the transition into the heat pumps, and so on. So actually, I believe this is going to accelerate, because, right? Because the higher the cost is, the more affordable it comes, and now to your point is technology. Now, technology is the other thing that Michael mentioned is about digitalization. And to be honest, I look at the two things, decarbonization and digitalization, as two mutually reinforcing trends. Why is that? Because what I meant with the phone, it's transparency. First and foremost, you need to have the transparency about understanding that. For example, in our case, when we produce goods for our customers, we do both, right? We do software and we do hardware. On the hardware side, it's 1 in 10. A tenth of the value created is happening in our factories, which we can control, and we have our own net zero target for 2030, fine. But 90% is in the supply chain. So you have to go deep into the supply chain. Now, how can you do that? Actually, by having the data, having all the data being shared within, but also then across the different supply chains, and having that seamlessly. Only then we will be able to really make those calculations.
So you're talking about blockchain, basically ledger technology applied to the supply chain, which we are not talking that much because we are all obsessed with this Bitcoin debacle. But that's the coolest part of blockchain.
It is. As a matter of fact, we just founded, or we are also running an association. It's called Estanium. So with Estanium, we've now pulled a lot of different companies, so an ecosystem, truly. Where TÜV Süd, us, many other big corporates are in there. And we do share now a common methodology with how to do those product carbon footprints, the PCFs, and how we share the data between each other and the supply chain. And there you go. It's exactly blockchain. So the way we actually hand over the data, so everybody can see it, everybody knows it, and it's trustful. And
transparent.
So that it's transparent, right?
So now in my experience, working experience, I was praised for creating partnerships. So I'm going to try on stage. So I have two C-suite executives. Peter asked Michael, Michael asked Peter something. And let's see if you get to know each other better and if your two industries can collaborate.
Well, honestly, these two companies anyway work together, I think, since a century.
I know. I wanted to look very good.
No. But the interesting part in that is, and why these cooperation and this interaction with companies like Peter is with, is so important. All of that, what that means now, and all of that, what is required to rebuild these value chains. Take, and Steffi said it, the colleague from BMW, take a typical car. I think you need for a typical car more than 10,000 components, right? If you really want to be sustainable in building a car, every of these components, every of these value chains need to be rebuilt and or structured in a different way, and or, like Peter was saying, bringing on the blockchain so that then you can see of what the overall impact and the footprint is. We are not engineers. We are bankers, as said, we are the intermediaries between the one and the other. To understand what it takes, to understand what it means to rebuild that, what are the players in this value chain, also from a risk perspective as a bank, to whom we can go with to make sure that not only the credit profile is a good one, but also that companies like Siemens are using these companies for their value chains. That is why this cooperation or interaction, for us at least, Peter, is so important.
So what would be your question to him now, as an executive struggling with all these competing challenges? What would you ask him as a peer, knowing where he comes from?
How can we make sure that as partners we can have an even deeper look in your value chains to understand what it takes to build this phone? And who are your partners? That would help us.
It's a good question, so then you cannot be nasty when you ask him a question, okay? Go ahead.
No, this is excellent. Actually, I would see it that way, that many of our customers, they are changing their business models. So what I mean by that is that, for example, take batteries, right? And you mentioned circular too. I believe that in the future, we have to rethink about how, for example, we sell goods. Yeah? And if you, today, a battery, for example, is designed by the cost when you ship it, right? When you sell it over the counter. But actually, that's inefficient. You really want to have it optimized over the life cycle. So that now, if you shift, I could sell you, let's say, any kind of kilowatt hours, right? As opposed to I sell you a battery.
A little bit like Philips did with light, right?
Like with light,
Yeah.
so hours
From
of
the bulb,
lighting,
they start selling light instead.
There you go, exactly. So you sell the unit of power.
The service.
The service.
Yeah.
And as you do that, you really have to find financing partners that would be willing to actually provide those funds in order to make this work. And I think this new business model innovation is crucial to change the paradigm of I'm not designing it just for the cost, but for the entire life cycle. And this is where actually I would ask Michael, indeed, how can you help us in particular, we have many small to medium-sized enterprises that are really struggling with that. They can't take it on their balance sheet, so they will need big banks actually to help.
I agree. No, I agree. That's why I would say if we can have this exchange beyond the question, can you help us with a single financing on a project?
Yes.
Which we anyway do, yeah? And we have a really good interaction on that. That would help us tremendously to make sure that also the smaller players in your value chain get enough financing.
And what will take that? A joint team, a venture outside, two big companies, which is more innovation-minded?
As always, it starts local. It starts with one specific use case. It starts in one country with one, and then we both go out and we have those partnerships in place.
Because I'm sure you could sell those, sorry for the word sell, but that's
advice.
What you do too. You can advise people like me or others with bigger budget, even at the individual level, and say, do you want to come into this deal, right? If it's a fund or if it's a single deal, that could be something else.
Yeah, that is one thing. And the other thing which we have currently introduced is that besides that we have bankers who understand the cash flow and the risk profile of a company, we have installed sector industry specialists. So they can talk on eye level with Peter. They have all kind of backgrounds, be it the data scientist, an engineering background, whatever it is, or an automotive background.
Poach from Siemens, you're poaching Siemens. And no one wants their children to be engineers, so now we are in a pickle here.
That is true. So that they can understand more from a technical point what that means and what it is, helping us then to translate that in bank language to make that happen. But the sector
and create product too,
absolutely,
right? That you can
that is so important.
Advise that I buy.
Yes.
I think this goes more. So I have a T-shirt that says mothership, which means I am a mother. He has fathership, I assume.
Yes.
And there is no discrimination whether you have them or not. But we heard that we have this choice on mobile. So all our children already use this technology. They don't make those choices. So what do you think about next gen and how we could, I know a bank looking at children and Siemens looking at children maybe a little bit. But as parents, as leader and thinking about the next generation, how could we engage future generation in making responsible choice around this, whether they're financial responsible choice. And I know that everybody in the room knows what ESG stands for. That's why I didn't spell it. Otherwise, Google it. Or what kind of technology, or even, this mindset of the circular business canvas where a product turns into a service and you look at all the function marketing, all these kind of things into a more circular way, so the life project. How do we make it easy for our children as they grow up?
I think they are far more progressive than we are on this stage. I just had the conversation with my son who said, well, you're not going to drive an internal combustion engine car anymore. I just want you to drive an electric car. And so clearly they say, no, we don't want to have that. So they get that. They absolutely get that. I mean, if you listen to everybody, then the two things that we as humans can do is obviously eat less meat and drive an electrical car. That has actually the biggest benefit for the footprint. And that's the conversation we're actually having. So in that sense, when talking to many young children, they really want to have that. And last point on this one is they get it. They really get it with regards to circular economy. They understand that with 8.5 billion people, this is not going to work out. They ask for circularity. They ask about how we're going to go about this.
In fashion too.
In fashion too, right? It's amazing of what is really being wasted there. And so I'm very impressed, to be honest. I actually learned from them as opposed to the other way around.
And I asked you this question, but you may not have the answer, so this one we Google it. The 15 kilo that we all have to offset, how much less meat for how long and how many steps we have to take today? Because we have electric car, thanks to BMW, so we're good with that. We'll do the math, and it's homework for everybody, by the way.
No, I would fully subscribe what Peter was saying. When we do recruiting, it is not the question about what is your car policy. The question from this generation is, what a difference I can make in your company. What is the impact I can bring to your firm? Sure, it is about salary. Sure, it is about promotion stuff. But when we go hiring, this generation is much more about what can we do in your company to make good for the next generation. They are much more educated. They are super demanding in that. We have certain rounds with all these Friday for Future representatives. They helped us to rethink some of our own stuff. So don't underestimate them. I'm really quite confident that this next generation will drive that even harder than we do.
I'm going to wrap it up. So we have transparent, honest, trustworthy, and responsible leader. Can you all cheer for them and telling them that they are cool? Because in the other room, they were saying that only the tech entrepreneurs are cool. Can we do that for them? Thank you very much.